So welcome all, welcome to everyone joining us electronically. And so this class today is, if you were here last week, we're continuing to work with this Lojong slogan, or this mind training slogan, called "When the world is full of evil, transform all mishaps into the path of wisdom." We're working on the liver and gallbladder channel. We're going to continue that. But let's begin by diving right in, finding ourselves taking a comfortable seat that establishes a sense of dignity in the body, defining dignity in the physical body as having that quality of a rooted seat, feeling legs, buttocks, pelvis as a firm earth-based foundation, feeling ourselves very connected at the base. Then from that connectivity, rising up through the spine, one vertebra at a time, allowing the internal quality of the posture to have some strength, while the external quality is very soft. There's a kind of regalness and openness in this seat. Feeling the breath flowing into and out of the body. And perhaps calling to mind the paraphrase of Dag Hammarskjöld's writing, "The only kind of dignity which is genuine is that which is not diminished by the indifference of others." And then for our opening bow, taking the hands to the hip crease, helping to open the chest and strengthen the back. On the exhale, we slowly incline the body forward and slowly come back up. Releasing the legs for butterfly pose, soles of the feet come together, with the heels generously distanced so that we can feel a stretch in the inner thigh but don't feel trapped within the architecture of the body. And then slowly inclining the torso forward until we find a good stretch in the inner thighs, hips, and back. And then we pause, allowing ourselves to settle into the pose. Using gravity and the breath to draw us deeper into the posture, not forcing or working to deepen the experience of the pose. Beginning, of course, with our first question, am I here now? Recalling that this question is always experienced in the affirmative when asked. But also recognizing that the quality of here-ness is one that arises from our tendency to wander off. So we begin fully conscious and aware of our breath, of our bodies, of our mind, of the room around us. And then we wander off. And all of a sudden we become absorbed, not in the totality of the moment, but rather in some specific thought stream. And we stay in that thought stream for a little bit, and then we suddenly come back. And when we come back, we spontaneously ask the question, am I here now? And we stay for a bit and we wander off again. Rather than seeing this wandering as an accident or a problem, we instead affirm the affirmative nature of returning. So we experience our returning and experience gratitude for the wandering off that allows us to return. If you're newer to this class, then we hear 3 chimes with the 3 questions, and then we come up and out of the posture. Am I here now? Can I feel what's going on in my body? Can I relax around that sensation? And we slowly come up and out. We pause with the spine lengthened. And then to both reverse the curve of the spine and to provide different and new tugs on the body, we come onto our abdomen for Sphinx pose. So shifting onto the belly with the elbows under the shoulders. And as the elbows come under the shoulders, we determine if that is too much or too little pull on the spine. And we have a couple of modifications. So one, which I do not mention as much, is that the legs can come closer together. This will actually cause a little bit more sensation to come into the low back. If we need less sensation, the elbows shift forward. If we need more, then the elbows can come under the shoulders and perhaps the arms begin to straighten a bit. Finding our way into a satisfying and effective Sphinx pose for our bodies today. The head and neck, secondary components of the posture so that they can, or so that we can do whatever we'd like with them. Letting the head drop, keeping the head in line with the spine, even back of the skull into the trapezius, whatever works best for our bodies. Breathing here. The second question, can I feel what's going on in my body, reminds us of the importance of releasing a tendency to narrativize our experience. So when we come back into the body, after perhaps wandering in thought, we are sometimes called back because of a feeling, whether that feeling is physical or emotional. And we have a choice with each of those moments, which is to feel the body, which is to connect to the raw sensation going on in the body, the actual feeling tone of sensation wherever it is arising, or to grasp onto that with thought and begin to describe, label, or narrativize. Noting that there is nothing wrong with that tendency to narrativize, to identify, and categorize per se. But for the purposes of this practice, recognizing how that tendency to latch on to thinking, or to combine feeling with thinking, has 2 outcomes. One is to make more permanent a particular feeling. And the second is to become lost in thought rather than in the present moment. Am I here now? Can I feel what's going on in my body? Can I relax around that sensation? So slowly flaring the elbows and coming down and out. Take a moment here to pause and relax. Still perhaps feeling the pull of the posture on the spine. But then as we bring patience and awareness to the posture, we begin to experience the dissipation, the evolution, the change in that sensation. And we relax with that. For the last posture, the twist, please, keeping your head as it is, roll onto your spine. And as you roll onto your spine, repositioning yourselves with the knees bent and the feet flat on the floor. And beginning by taking our knees to the left, the wall side of the room, we'll drop the knees over, and if we find that the sensation here is too much, then the top leg lifts off of the bottom. And if it's too little, the bottom ankle hooks on the outside of the top leg. We can lift the right arm up a bit to spread the twist up the entirety of the spine. So as you settle into your twist, the third question, can I relax? And that's really the note to self to release the cognitive impulse to grasp onto feeling and to make it more permanent or to explain it. When we experience the feelings of the body, we oftentimes accompany it with thought rather than allowing it to be as it is. So as we allow the sensations to arise and we relax, we instead get to experience the actual texture, feeling tone of sensation. And we also allow ourselves to see its impermanent nature. So even this twist, which is being performed through the spine for about 3 minutes, you still can begin to notice its texture, its transformation over time, perhaps getting less intense, perhaps getting more intense, perhaps changing in where it occurs. And so we begin to really note the shifting quality of sensation, the movement of sensation. And that starts to build our confidence that we are never really subject to anything for any particularly long length of time. nothing is permanent in terms of our own experience. Am I here now? Can I feel what's going on in my body? Can I relax around that sensation? And you slowly begin to move yourself back to center, taking your time. And when you arrive at center, finding yourself taking whatever postures or movements are necessary to resettle the spine after twisting. Taking a moment, and then taking the other side. So with the feet flat on the floor, letting the knees drop, and perhaps this time on this side, the top knee needs to lift, or perhaps the bottom ankle needs to come out and hook to the outside of the knee. And perhaps the arm can lift, or perhaps because of the shoulder girdle, it needs to stay alongside the body or with the hand resting on the body. So continuing in this class, our part 6 of this Lojong slogan, when the world is full of evil, transform all mishaps to the path of wisdom. Focusing for this month on the liver and gallbladder channels. And adding a bit from our last class onto the nature of this channel, which once again runs from the inner thigh or inner foot and calf line up the inner thigh and into the area at the physically proximate to the liver. And in the case of the gallbladder, up the outside of the leg, in through the torso, up through the rib cage, up through the side of the neck and into the eye, around through the side of the head. And on the topic of the liver and gallbladder, Harriet Beinfeld and Ephraim Korn, in their book Between Heaven and Earth, write, the gallbladder imparts the power of decision and the liver the power of action. The purity of the bile assures pure and proper judgment, clarity of vision, thought, and decision-making. If the liver and gallbladder are dissonant, action occurs without judgment, decisions go unactualized, or a Hamlet-like paralysis of decision and action persists. Metaphorically, the gallbladder and bile form a liquid crystal, like the lens of the eye through which we perceive existent and anticipated, inner and outer reality. Our prescience and foresight arise from this faculty. With a deterioration in function of the liver network, a veil obstructs vision and thought. Reminding ourselves that the physical postures of the practice are guided by this language of traditional Chinese medicine, and the metaphor of the organ channel relates to our main contemplative practice. Am I here now? Can I feel what's going on in my body? around that sensation. So now we flow out of the posture back to the center, and we take a moment to stretch and release. We'll remain on our back here for the next posture, so please also choose to stretch and release your spine as needed. We'll begin with eye of the needle pose. So as we bring the feet back to the floor, we will cross the right ankle over the left thigh below the line of the knee. And determine here if we are generating enough sensation in the hip. If we have more to give, while keeping the head and shoulders connected to the floor, we'll draw the left thigh into the body and grasping with the hands, pulling the leg, the thigh more deeply into the body. For those with exceptional hip flexibility here and some openness in the hamstring naturally, you may choose to take this pose to a deeper stage by straightening your left leg and grasping the ankle, pulling the leg down towards you. So beginning to more deeply and impactfully stretch and open the hip here, the gallbladder channel, as well as through the connection we may be able to make between the body and the inner thigh, compressing the liver channel line. In both cases, whatever variations we're choosing, slightly compressing and constricting the hip crease, allowing us to isolate the lower body energy, the chi and blood, from the upper, which we will then open and release both between poses and in the next pose. Recalling, if we've been to class for the last few weekends, that our theme this month is derived from a reading from Zongsar Jamyang Kensei's book, What Makes You Not a Buddhist. And in the previous class sequence in the month of August, we explored this concept of inter-arness and impermanence. And as a brief reminder, through contemplation, we began to see the interdependent nature of things. That is to say that we determined that all things arise from some other thing. What Jamyang Kensei identified as the nature of the egg, for the hard-boiled egg to exist, there is a number of things that must arise. And for those things to arise, other things must arise. And we drew out from that particular segment of his book the following passage. By knowing that something is lying in wait for you just around the bend, by accepting that countless potentialities exist from this moment forward, you acquire the skill of pervasive awareness and foresight, like that of a gifted general. Not paranoid, but prepared. So metaphorically, we work through the liver and gallbladder channel as the liver and gallbladder are the general and the captain of the army. One responsible for laying the plans and one responsible for executing them. And we began to deal with this challenge of preparation versus paranoia. And it's useful perhaps to start by simply noting or noticing our own tendency or the tendency of those things around us to really emphasize a kind of fear and a kind of anxiety around the conditions of life that prompt us to want to be prepared and also paranoid. We may wish to reflect briefly on the ways in which we experience preparation as paranoia in our own lives. Perhaps it's the alarm system. Perhaps it's the locks on the doors. Perhaps it's multiple bank accounts. Perhaps it's your lucky ritual you do every day. And we notice the difference between preparation and paranoia because paranoia has that kind of clingy grasping that we investigate with the 3 questions at the beginning of each class. Am I here now? Can I feel what's going on in my body? Can I relax around that sensation? And we start to come out of eye of the needle pose. And we release, taking a moment to allow the legs to go long and to undam, to release the inguinal crease, the thigh crease, side of the femoral arteries and veins, thus allowing some blood flow back into the upper portions of the body before we reconstruct the pose on the other side. So taking eye of the needle on the opposite leg, being prepared for us to experience perhaps a different level of flexibility or capability on this second side. But choosing to go as deep as you can, perhaps ultimately drawing the thigh into the body, and for those with exceptional flexibilities in the hip and the hamstring, perhaps straightening the leg and reaching for the ankle. So when we recognize our tendency towards paranoia underneath our preparedness, we perhaps begin to experience or notice, as we talked about in the last class, a kind of fundamental desire to avoid life. In our last class, after the reading from Pema Chödrön, we offered the idea that we cannot avoid or escape life. And again, we'll unpack that a bit in today's practice. So as we begin this unpacking, it's useful to begin by grounding ourselves in this quality of inter-arness, this quality of codependence, interdependence. And drawing from a teaching in Jack Kornfield's book, Teachings of the Buddha. By the same reasoning, enlightenment cannot exist apart from ignorance, nor ignorance apart from enlightenment. Since things do not differ in their essential nature, there can be no duality. It is a mistake for people to think or to seek a thing supposed to be good and right, and to flee from another supposed to be bad and evil. It is a mistake for people to seek a thing supposed to be good and right, and to flee from another supposed to be bad and evil. So in that teaching that there is no enlightenment apart from ignorance, and there is no ignorance apart from enlightenment, and the seeking for the good and fleeing from the evil, is this idea that we cannot have one without the other. That to run towards one thing without including the other is to deny the balanced and interconnected nature of life. You cannot even know the good, quote unquote, without simultaneously knowing, quote unquote, the bad. And to label them as such is to make an assumption about permanence, that all good things are good inherently and permanently, and all bad things are bad inherently and permanently. Am I here now? Can I feel what's going on in my body? Can I relax around that sensation? And you slowly begin to unwind. You release. You take a moment for the hips to open, shoulders to relax. From here, reversing the spine and also opening the upper part of the liver and gallbladder channels, we'll roll onto our stomachs for seal pose, or a repetition of Sphinx. So as you come around and onto your abdomen, you have the choice now as you settle your arms to instead settle the hands, and with the fingers turned out to open the shoulders, press the arms straight. Or if you're working with any tenderness or sensitivities in the low back that prompt you to remain in Sphinx pose, then the elbows come under the shoulders. And of course, modulating sensation by widening or narrowing the width of the thighs. And letting the head and neck be appropriately positioned based on your particular need. So our experience of good and bad, ignorance and enlightenment, are not only codependent, but also subject to the same impermanence that all other things are. That there is no permanently bad thing. Buddhism, in this sense, often seems like a very depressing practice, as there is not anything that we can cling to, per se, as a kind of compass. There's not anything that is so fixed that it can always be a point of reference. But given this impermanent and interdependent nature of things, it does allow us to start with ourselves as a useful ground for awareness of these bigger ideas. So you may wish to note in your own practice, in this moment, in this posture, and perhaps in the next one as well, your own awareness of this tension. You may experience that first and foremost as impatience, as a desire to be out of the pose, as a desire to be elsewhere completely. And experiencing that, you may find, simply because you believe that anything will be better than this. But noticing that having no certainty around that anything else will be better, that you have to really create in your own mind an idea of this as suffering and something else as pleasurable. Am I here now? Can I feel what's going on in my body? Can I relax around that sensation? Coming down and out. Pausing for a moment and perhaps now taking a moment to press the body back towards child's pose or any other forward bending posture, although that will be our next stop in terms of our practice. And as you press yourself up and back, taking note of your spine, and then shifting, please, onto your buttocks, onto your seat, for shoelace pose, or cow's face pose.
Pose I do not know.
There you go. Well, it's something new every day. So to begin building this posture, let's start by taking our left heel and shifting it towards the outside of our right hip. The buttock can slightly sit onto the heel, or the leg can be, for some, completely on the outside. Then the right leg traveling over, perhaps first stopping with the ankle just on the outside of the thigh and noticing the tendency of the right buttock to lift. And we can let that happen, or we can bring some weight onto that hip to lower down. We can then begin to shift the legs around so that ultimately, perhaps someday, the knees are directly stacked over each other and the heels are directly at the edges of the hips, although that may not happen for many of us. And we begin to slowly come forward, compressing the body as much as we can against the thigh, as the hands relax into any position that feels comfortable. So we want to, in this posture, both compress the inner line of the bottom thigh with the top leg and compress the inner line of the top leg with the body, simultaneously activating the upper and lower channels of the liver and gallbladder organs. As we rest here, in this posture, passively opening and balancing the liver and gallbladder channels, bringing the mind's attention to this awareness of our tendency, of a tendency we can have, to set our compass to a sense of permanent good and moving away from another pole of permanent evil. And perhaps also noticing from our own experience how those two poles never seem to stay fixed for very long. You may experience it in this pose. What starts off as a good thing quickly becomes annoying, difficult. That your sort of initial enthusiasm, the posture wanes and then gives way to impatience. Yet nothing is different. The pose is still the pose. So what we discover is that it's ourselves who are shifting in response to these things. So in the Rumi poem, or the Hafiz poem rather, that we read last week, called Burglars Hear, Watchdogs, the last few lines of the poem say, burglars hear watchdogs inside of his gifts, referring to gifts from, in this poem, God, and run. Burglars hear watchdogs inside of his gifts and run. And for Hafiz, this is really the idea of that those who don't see sort of the all-encompassing nature of God's presence in the world are always running from these things, that they're in some way protected. For us, or in this particular system, we might instead say that what we're called to remember is that we have a tendency to run from those things that are unpleasant, thinking that we've found something that we shouldn't experience. That we have run away from what is unpleasant because we are certain that is not what we are supposed to experience. And we become the burglars of our own experience. We become the burglars of our own experience. Here now. Can I feel what's going on with my body? Can I relax around that sensation? So slowly begin to come up and out. Unwind. And then coming back into the posture on the other side. So now the right heel to the left and the left leg on top. Finding that hip, perhaps lifting a bit and then settling in. And then slowly coming forward and down. Perhaps feeling deep tension, buttocks and hips, perhaps feeling it in the spine, compression of the body against itself. Many places to feel this posture. So similarly, Pema Chödrön in her newest book writes about her experience in a meditation interview with her teacher, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. And in response to her statement about her life being over, he tells her a story about sort of walking into the ocean. And he concludes, the passage concludes with, so the waves keep coming, he said, and you keep cultivating your courage and bravery and sense of humor to relate to the situation of the waves. And you keep getting up and going forward. So we notice in this that Trungpa Rinpoche's advice to Pema Chödrön is not, the waves are an illusion, or go to Canyon Ranch and get your chakras reiki, or that you must be doing something wrong because you experience difficulty. Instead, he says, you have to cultivate courage and bravery and humor. That the key is not to avoid the waves, but rather to address the internal attitudes towards it. So just like the burglars fleeing from the watchdogs, many people end up simply walking away from the adverse situation and rob themselves of the gift of developing that courage, that humor, that bravery. You might say what we're trying to do is to convert paranoia into courage, bravery, and humor. And seeing those as much as qualities as skills. That courage is a skill, that bravery is a skill, that humor is a skill. One that is cultivated through continued application of them to the circumstances of our lives. What's going on in my body? Can I relax around that sensation? And as you unwind, come up. Last week we were a little full, packed into bhakti. So today we can practice the posture that sequenced after this one, which is dragonfly pose. So what I'd like you to do is, negotiating with any very close neighbors, take your legs out and as wide as you can. Feeling free to bend the legs. And if you have exceptional flexibility here, such that you are easily able in a forward bend like this to bring your torso all the way to the floor, then please bend your knees, take your arms underneath, and take tortoise pose instead. It'll take you a little bit more deeper into the pose. For those of us who are not at that stage, then simply starting to walk yourself forward until you find yourself caught in the architecture of your body, the tightness of your hamstrings, tightness of your inner thighs, the tension in your low back. And pause here. In dragonfly pose, also called seated straddle or Upavista Konasana in Hatha Yoga. So we cultivate this quality of bravery, courage, and humor. And if you've practiced yin long enough, you know that we do that partially through the creation of discomfort in the body. That some of our postures seem to be very much designed to encourage suffering. And that suffering comes in the form of the long-held postures with really no support. They are just what they are. But also that same tendency that given the long holds, we have nothing to face but ourselves. And we are continuously encouraged to face ourselves in that way. This is a distinct aspect of this yin practice. One might say, if you're not suffering, you're just not getting it. And indeed, if your suffering is only on the level of the physical, then this is why we encourage an expression of the pose that is deep but dull rather than sharp. Because the most uncomfortable aspect of the pose should be yourself in it. The attention to yourself and to the nature of your being stripped of distraction. Now, for some of us, we've spent quite a lot of time disliking ourselves. So this can feel a little bit depressing. But the difference is that we're called not to dislike ourselves, but instead to notice ourselves. So dislike is by its nature an aspect of grasping. We cannot dislike something without simultaneously knowing the opposite of it and labeling it as such. Instead, we cultivate a patience with ourselves, and we cultivate a willingness to be brave and courageous and have some humor about ourselves. Whether you're sitting in a posture or in meditation for 5 minutes or 5 days, the goal is to develop that kind of humorous patience and kindness towards your own experience. Here now. Can I feel what's going on in my body? Can I relax around that sensation? And as you slowly start to come up and out of the pose, drawing your legs together and shifting forward so you have enough room behind you to lay in your back, please bring with you a blanket or an eye covering if you've brought one. And on the back, please widen your feet so that you can drop your knees in together. And then taking your blanket or eye covering, covering the top of the face and the eyes so that the space below the bridge of the nose downwards is uncovered, but the entirety of the upper face, if you're using a blanket, is covered completely. Accessing the last line of the gallbladder channel that terminates in the outside of the eye. And breathing here. Using the internal rotation of the legs, which many people often find a helpful antidote to any tension in the low back or hips while resting supine with the legs straight. And again, the eye covering, intentionally working towards the terminal point of the gallbladder channel. And as you hold this posture, and as you settle, perhaps more fully committing yourself to resting with yourself and being mindful of your experience in the pose and your experience of yourself in the posture. So I'm recalling Trungpa Rinpoche's advice to Pema Chödrön. So the waves keep coming, he said. You keep cultivating your courage, bravery, and sense of humor to relate to the situation of the waves. And you keep getting up and going forward. It's useful to note that he doesn't say, you get up and just stand there and wait for the next wave to knock you over. Instead, you keep pressing forward. So there's a quality of never giving up on yourself, and simultaneously never giving up on the quality of life within you and around you. Am I here now? Can I feel what's going on in my body? Can I relax around that sensation? In the last few moments of class, taking a moment to find a comfortable, relaxed position. And I encourage you, just for today, just for this class perhaps, that rather than trying to optimize your comfort by propping yourself endlessly, instead find a position that is comfortable based on your own needs and body. We have created a kind of tyranny of shavasana, which is that we endlessly commit to lying on our backs, and then when lying on our backs becomes uncomfortable, we invest in hundreds of dollars of props so that we can lie on our backs comfortably, because BKS Iyengar told us that that's what we should do. Instead, what is comfortable for you? What is satisfying for you? And now, beginning to slowly move yourself from your restful posture up towards seated, moving slowly but resolutely, so that you arrive settled and stable in a seated posture with dignity and comfort, expressing the internal regalness of yourself. sitting in that regalness for a moment before we close the practice with the aspiration and the bow. So please take the hands to the hip crease with the elbows open, heart open, the back strong. The aspiration, 3 chimes on the third, we bow. May I experience happiness and the root of happiness. May you experience happiness and the root of happiness. May all beings everywhere experience happiness and the root of happiness. Namaste.
Namaste.
So thank you everyone for practicing. So if you're staying for Meridian Energy Arts, I think I'll check and see if we're going to be next door, but stay here for a second if you're staying. I'm betting Reiki Restorative will be next door, but we have some substitutions this weekend, so I'm not sure if you'd be in there. But in any case, enjoy. Hopefully some of you have Monday off and enjoy it. If you don't, thank you so much for laboring on Labor Day. And otherwise, have a wonderful week.
Next door.